With the threat of war seeming to be once again on the horizon, with the church in full meltdown, with new allegations against Cardinal Bernardin coming to light that sound literally like they came out of the pages of Malachi Martin's Windswept House, and with an Amazon Synod coming soon that will probably actualize the schism that we see before us. At the risk of sounding like an extremist lunatic, the timing seems right to bring attention to part of the message of Our Lady of Fatima that is often overlooked, the request, or maybe demand, for the spreading of the 5 First Saturdays devotion. If you're not familiar with this part of the Fatima message, don't be surprised. Most people focus on the third secret and the consecration of Russia. As the story goes, on July 13th, 1917, Our Lady requested the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart, and that the laity keep the 5 First Saturdays devotion. With the focus so much on the mystery surrounding the third secret of Fatima and the debate on whether or not Russia was ever consecrated to Mary's Immaculate Heart, this key detail is often left out. People have largely forgotten about the 5 First Saturdays devotion. The time has long since passed to fix this error. What does the devotion entail? The 5 First Saturdays devotion is surprisingly simple. On the first Saturday of the month, for the 5 consecutive months, the laity are asked to do the following. First, go to confession. Second, validly receive the sacrament of the Eucharist. Third, say 5 decades of the Rosary. 4. Meditate after Mass for 15 minutes on the mysteries of the Rosary. These acts are to be done in reparation for sins and blasphemies committed against the Immaculate Heart of Mary and against the Sacred Heart of our Lord. These include the spread of impurity in the culture and in reparation for those who believe and say vile things about our Blessed Lord and His Mother. Those include Protestants who deny the Immaculate Conception. There is an alternative understanding to the devotion, which entails perpetually going to Mass on the first Saturday of the month and doing all of what I just said, save for meditating on a single mystery of the Rosary for 15 minutes. There is some debate about this because, like with the third secret, the institutional church ignored Our Lady's request for this devotion to be kept, and, as such, never bothered to clarify the requirements for the devotion, which would be the right of the church to do so. For the record, I keep the latter form of the devotion, and I don't say that to claim some epic level of piety, as I always, without fail, need to go to confession at the start of the Mass on Saturday anyway, but because that is the form I have reason to believe is the correct one, as the source seems to be Sister Lucia herself. Either way, Our Lady requested this to be done at the same time that she requested the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart. For those of us who don't think the consecration was ever done, or for those who think that it was done but are wondering why that promised age of peace hasn't materialized yet, the answer might be simple. This devotion hasn't spread throughout the Church, as she requested. I have a running theory that the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart, the real consecration, done with the bishops who remain in union with the Holy See, whatever that will actually mean as this mess continues, won't be done until the absolute final hour, largely because the laity haven't done what has been asked of us by the Mother of God. The message of Fatima, the request given at Fatima, had 2 parts. The request to consecrate Russia that we've all heard a lot about, which was a request made to the hierarchy. But the first message was given to the laity, requesting that the devotion be kept. We, the laity, ignored it completely, with help from our shepherds, who don't make the masses of reparation available anyway. To see the lack of adherence to this devotion, one simply has to spend a few minutes looking at Mass times on diocesan parish websites. After spending some time looking at Mass times online, and even reaching out to various parishes, I was shocked to discover that, at least in my area, most parishes do not offer a first Saturday Mass of reparation at all. My wife and I drive a semi-unreasonable distance for Mass on Sunday to attend the traditional Latin Mass, and every Latin Mass-only parish we've been to offers a first Saturday Mass. Whether it's a parish run by the Fraternal Society of St. Peter, or the Society of St. Pius X, or the numerous set of Acanthus chapels relatively close to my home, they all offer the first Saturday Mass of reparation. Not a single Novus Ordo parish does. Oh sure, they offer the Saturday Vigil Mass, which, as an aside, technically should only be attended if you do not have the ability to go to Mass on Sunday. If you bristle at that statement, that Mass was explicitly made available for first responders and others who had essential jobs that required that they work on Sundays, not only to support their families, but for the good and safety of society. Now it's just another Mass time, mostly for people who seem to like to sleep in on Sunday. Again, I'm not trying to be judgmental here. And people, thanks to creeping changes made by modernists, that's how it came about, which is why I'm always so hostile to change. Now, conceivably, one could attend the Vigil Mass and observe the requirements of the 5 First Saturdays devotion therein, though it would not be ideal due to there not necessarily being available confession and the Rosary prior to Mass, or even the possibility of meditating in the chapel after Mass on the mysteries of the Rosary as requested. Also, typically, at least at the traditional Latin Masses I've gone to for the First Saturday devotion, the Mass is itself offered as an act of reparation, and you're not going to find that at a Vigil Mass on Saturday. Often these Novus Ordo parishes after Mass can be loud on a Saturday night, and often enough they try to usher people out of the chapel quickly. Everyone seems to have better things to do on Saturday than meditate on the mysteries of the Rosary. One really has to get close to major metropolitan areas to find a diocesan parish that celebrates the Novus Ordo Missae that offers this devotional Mass. I have seen parishes that do this, but they appear to be relatively rare. But even at parishes that offer the traditional Latin Mass exclusively and offer the First Saturday Mass, these Masses are often sparsely attended, which is both surprising and disappointing, given the reputation that traditional Catholics have for being serious about the message of Fatima. According to Sister Lucia's memoirs, Our Lady wanted keeping of this devotion to be either part of the law of the Church, or at their very least promoted very heavily by the Holy Father and by the bishops. That hasn't happened, as most Catholics are blissfully unaware of the request for this devotion, or the graces that come from observing it. I also suspect that there is little interest in it either, as it isn't a sensational message. The mysterious third secret is almost certainly sensational, which of course drives interest. But going to confession, praying the Rosary, receiving our Lord in the Eucharist, reflecting on his life, passion, death, resurrection, and ascension to heaven, nah, none of that is particularly sensational, in part at least because we as wretched sinners have become so desensitized to the gospel that a request to keep this devotion is almost meaningless to most Catholics. But having said that, I'd bet most Catholics haven't even heard about this part of the message. Pay attention to the so-called Fatimists, a term that is a slur, and very few of them speak out about the 5 First Saturdays devotion either, although some do, like the late Father Gruner and John Venari both did. Most choose instead to focus on the third secret, its obvious cover-up, and the consecrations that did not meet the request of Our Lady. Like I said, it's understandable because of how sensational the third secret of Fatima, the message of Akita, and the message of Tre Fontane are. They're sensational, and deal with what sounds like an impending apocalypse. Compared to a request to go to Mass to stave all that off, it sounds kind of boring. But the Mass is never boring if you understand it. Confession is never boring. While we do not have the ability to change the law of the Church or to force the Holy Father to do what we want, we can choose to live as if the request by Our Lady was a serious one by observing the 5 First Saturdays. The devotion can be started at any point in the year, as long as it is done so on a first Saturday of the month. Feel free to start this coming month if you can. Make the time if possible. Aside from doing your part to fulfill Our Lady's requests, going to confession and receiving our Lord in the Eucharist more frequently can only lead to greater graces and sanctification. It is time well spent, even if it requires once a month getting out of bed a little earlier on a Saturday morning than you might normally. So please observe the 5 First Saturdays devotion, even if it is a little inconvenient to do so. I do, and I know that a few subscribers here do as well. You won't regret keeping this devotion. Like I keep saying, graces flow from the keeping of this devotion, and it really needs to be promoted by the Church more. This isn't my first video on the subject, nor will it be my last, God willing. Promoting this has become a mission of mine since day one, so I hope you'll heed the message. Thanks for listening. Keep praying for the liberation of the Church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.